Okay, so today we finished up our discussion on intentional torts and we began to move into a discussion on battery. And we were supposed to make it to assault today, but we didn't quite make it that far. So I'll go ahead and share most of the cases that we talked about battery. There will be one that I think I missed, but let's start with intentional torts. There is one thing that I want to say before finishing up the subject, and that is an intentional tort is basically an element of another tort. So for example, a battery is an intentional tort. An assault is an intentional tort. So an intentional tort is a type of tort where the intention matters. So for example, you have negligence, which is not an intentional tort, because negligence is not a battery, assault, things like that. Is just negligent, and it's found that there's no intention in negligent, so it's not an intentional tort. With that said, let's go into Talmadge v. Smith, which is the first case that we talked today, and the last case about intentional torts. Smith is the defendant here, and Talmadge is the father of a boy who was hit by a stick from Smith. What happened here is Smith owned some property. He owned a shed, and there were boys who were on the shed. He hollered at them to get down. They got down. He walked around. He found a couple more boys on the shed, and he hollered at them to get down. And they started to get down, but he threw a stick at one of the boys, whose name was also Smith, not related, but Smith threw a stick at Smith. Charles Smith threw a stick at Byron Smith, or whatever else his name was. So that's really how that started. But what happened is that the stick missed Smith and hit another boy named Talmadge, and that's how Talmadge became the plaintiff here. The question that we're really having is, does Talmadge have a claim of battery against Smith, considering how Smith didn't intend to throw the stick at Talmadge, but instead intended to throw it at Smith? And the answer here is that yes. So the rule is that an injury that results from another, other than the one that was intended, does not relieve the defendant from responsibility. So if Smith commits a tort against one person, if Smith intends to commit a tort against one person, but commits a tort against another person, that is called a transferable intent. Yes, so that's transferable intent. So transferable intent works the way where it passes from person to person and tort to tort. In this analysis, the court gave three scenarios, and it kind of shows the property thing for Smith here. But the first one is if Smith did not intend to hit any boy, but instead just meant to frighten, Smith cannot be found liable for the damages caused to Talmadge. Second, it's if the jury finds that he did intend to throw the stick at Smith, but it wasn't unreasonable, then he is not liable for damages against Talmadge, and that's because it's his property and they are trespassing, and if it's reasonable, then, well, he has every right, in that sense, to make sure that his property is secure. But if he intended to hit one of the boys and the force was excessive, then it is an unlawful action, and Smith is liable for the damage caused to Talmadge. So here, he intended to throw a stick at Smith. The force was excessive. It hit Talmadge, and so the transferable intent here applies, and it's a tort. And Smith is found liable of committing an intentional tort, in this form, a battery. So, in this essence, he intended to commit an intentional tort of, assault. He intended to commit a tort of assault, and then actually committed a tort of battery through this principle of transferred intent. Okay, so that's everything finishing up intentional torts. I want to briefly touch on to battery. We talked about one case here. This is Wallace. The full case is Wallace v. Rosen. What happened here is that Wallace was a parent of a student, and Rosen was a teacher, and Wallace came to the school to deliver some homework. And as she was in the hall, she was talking to her daughter and some other students, and the fire alarm sounded. And Rosen, with her students, came out into the hall, and there's some differing opinions as to what actually happened, whether there was anger in the voice or whatever, if Rosen pushed aggressively. But what happened is that Rosen approached Wallace, who couldn't hear her, asking her to move, and so she moved her in the right direction. Whether that was excessive or not, that was for the jury to discover, and the jury said that it was not. Now, what happened here is Wallace wanted to give the jury a certain instruction, and the instruction was for battery, requiring, which had several rules. The first rule was that it intended contact. The second rule was that the touching, the contact, was rude, violent, or angry. And the plaintiff here, Wallace, wanted the jury to also be instructed, saying if it was reckless, then it was seen as an intentional tort, as battery. And the judge, in this instant, he refused to give that instruction. And not only did he refuse to give the instruction on battery there, but he refused to give an instruction on battery at all. And so that's what Wallace is appealing about, was the judgment right to say that that the judge did not need to give a judgment on battery. And this goes into the principle of dual intent that we talked about a while ago, and want to focus a bit more on that now. So dual intent is when you need to consider the interests of both parties, where harm did occur to the plaintiff, and that's why they're suing, or a harm or offense, I should say. But if the defendant was acting in good faith, then who should be found at fault in this situation? Or rather, should they be found at fault in this situation? What happened in this case is it was a crowded area, and a reasonable jury, meaning that there's no alteration of what alternative story of what could have happened, but a reasonable jury would not have found this a battery at all had the instruction been given. So the judge saw it fit that the instruction didn't need to be given at all. Because this reasonable standard exists, this dual intent can be focused on, and the judge acts as a little bit of a filter between ensuring that the rules are taken care of, but the procedure is also taken care of. So that's really what we talked about with battery and intentional torts. I just want to share the rule of battery one more time. It's been focused on a ton through our topics of intentional torts and battery, but just focusing on what battery is. It's first, intending to create contact that is harmful or violent, and second, that contact actually occurs and results in a harmful or offensive thing that happens to the plaintiff. That was our discussion. Have a good one. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Law Schoolers. Before I let you go, there are 4 things I want to say. The first thing is, if you enjoyed these episodes and if you enjoyed the website, I would invite you to go and join Law Schoolers Pro. And you can do that by going to lawschoolers.com/join. It's a way for you to support us, but there's also a lot of features there that I think you will enjoy. Second thing is that nearly all of our episodes are unedited. The only ones that aren't are pre-law materials, and the reason for that is so you can actually see the legal material in its raw form as I'm learning it as well. The third thing is that the information contained in these episodes are specifically only for educational purposes. They're not to be used as legal advice, and with that, the fourth thing is if it is used as legal advice, we are not liable. That is, law scholars is not liable for any legal outcomes. Thank you again for enjoying the show. Have a good one.